It started like any other Thursday evening. I'd just come back from work, hoping for a quiet night in with my wife, Amanda. We had our routines down, dinner around 7, a little TV, then we'd go over our plans for the weekend. Nothing extraordinary, but it was ours. I figured it was part of what kept us strong, the comfort of routine, of knowing what came next. But that night, as soon as I walked through the door, I sensed something was off. Amanda was there, smiling, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. Her laugh felt a little too practiced, like she was on autopilot. And, most telling of all, her phone was practically glued to her hand. Normally, she'd leave it on the table or even toss it on the couch without a second thought. That night, though, she kept it close, checking it constantly, as if she was waiting for some urgent call or text. "Everything okay?" I asked as casually as I could, watching her reaction closely. She looked up quickly, almost startled, and forced a smile. "Yeah, just work stuff. You know how it is." I didn't push further. After all, I didn't want to come off as paranoid or suspicious. We'd been married 8 years, and I thought we had trust, a real, solid foundation. I'd always told myself that if anything ever seemed off, it was just life throwing us a curveball. But that night, something gnawed at me. A sense of unease I couldn't shake. Dinner was uneventful, and we barely spoke. She laughed at the sitcom playing on the TV, but there was something off in her laugh. I couldn't place it, and maybe I was just being paranoid. I kept telling myself it was nothing, just a rough day at work or some small issue she didn't want to talk about yet. As we sat in the living room, I glanced over and saw her phone light up again. She glanced at it, quickly swiped to clear the notification, and set the phone down, face down this time. I'd seen her check her phone a dozen times already, but that move was different. She'd never hidden her screen before. When she got up to get something from the kitchen, I felt a wave of panic rise. Should I check it? No, I couldn't do that. We had trust, didn't we? I pushed the thought aside and settled back into the couch, but my mind kept spinning. I knew I'd never be able to ignore that little itch of doubt until I got to the bottom of it. The following weekend, we had plans to attend a friend's birthday party. I thought about skipping it, coming up with some excuse, but Amanda seemed unusually eager to go. "It'll be fun," she said, flashing that smile that used to make me feel like the luckiest man alive. Now, though, it only made me feel hollow. The party was in full swing when we arrived. I greeted a few friends and tried to relax, though I couldn't stop thinking about her odd behavior. Amanda was her usual charming self, flitting around the room, laughing and chatting with everyone. At some point, I lost track of her as she drifted into another group. I turned back to my friends, trying to distract myself. But then I saw her from across the room. She was talking to a guy I'd never seen before, and they were standing close, closer than necessary. He was tall, with that too smooth look of someone who's aware of his own appeal. I felt a pang of something I didn't want to name. She laughed at something he said, and her hand brushed his arm. I told myself it was innocent, just her being friendly. But that little voice in the back of my mind whispered, "Something's wrong." I watched as she leaned in to hear him over the music, her face lighting up in a way I hadn't seen in a while. It hit me like a punch to the gut. Was I really seeing this? Had it been going on right under my nose? I was frozen in place, feeling like a stranger in my own life. I wanted to go over there, confront her, ask what was going on. But some part of me held back, an instinct telling me that now wasn't the time. I needed proof, something more than just a gut feeling or a single glance. I needed to know for sure. So I waited, forcing myself to look away, to pretend I hadn't seen anything. When we left the party, I kept quiet, and she didn't seem to notice. She was distracted, checking her phone every few minutes. That familiar knot of doubt tightened in my chest. Every smile, every laugh, every stolen glance at her phone, each one felt like another crack in the foundation of everything I thought I knew. That night, after she'd fallen asleep, I lay there, wide awake, staring at the ceiling. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I needed to know the truth, no matter how much it hurt. The next morning, she got up early to run some errands, leaving her phone on the bedside table. My heart hammered as I stared at it, half tempted to just grab it and search through it. But I knew better than to go through her messages outright. It was her personal phone, and if she caught me, any confrontation would turn into an argument about trust. I needed to find a better way, a subtle way. I waited until she'd gone, then carefully opened her laptop, which she always left logged in. My hand shook as I clicked into her messages, reading through each line. And there it was, a name I didn't recognize, Jason, with messages that were far from innocent. Each line was like a slap to the face. She was calling him babe, telling him how she couldn't wait to see him, how she missed him. My heart shattered as I read the words. They were filled with the warmth, the affection, that she used to reserve for me. I kept reading, piecing together fragments of her betrayal, feeling each one pierce deeper. There were months of texts, hidden in plain sight. Every time she'd told me she was working late or meeting a friend, she'd been with him. Jason. I put the laptop down, my mind racing. I felt numb, detached, like I was watching this unfold from outside my own body. The Amanda I knew, the woman I'd loved and trusted, was gone. I didn't recognize this person anymore. And I knew, right then and there, that there was no going back from this. I spent the rest of the day in a haze, going through the motions. By the time she came back, I'd managed to mask my emotions, playing my part, pretending everything was fine. But inside, I was falling apart. She noticed nothing. She chatted away, laughing as though nothing had changed, and I forced myself to smile, to nod. I felt like I was watching her from behind glass, a spectator in my own life. I waited for her to leave the room, to give me a moment to breathe, but she kept talking, oblivious to the storm raging inside me. I told myself I needed time to think, to decide what to do. But every time I looked at her, I saw those messages, heard her laughter with him, and it took everything in me to stay calm. That night, when she fell asleep beside me, I lay awake, staring at her, wondering how I'd missed the signs for so long. I thought about every moment we'd shared, every laugh, every kiss, and wondered if any of it had been real. And then, as the hours ticked by in silence, I knew what I had to do. I would get my revenge, but I'd be patient, wait for the right moment. I'd make sure she knew exactly what she had lost. Once I knew the truth, I felt like I was living with a stranger. Every time Amanda looked at me, smiled, laughed, it all felt fake, like she was playing a part in some twisted game. I wanted to scream at her, demand to know why she'd betrayed me, why she'd ruined everything we'd built. But I knew that wouldn't get me what I wanted. I needed her to feel the weight of her betrayal the way I felt it. And I wasn't going to rush this. If she wanted secrets, I'd give her something to keep secret about. I spent the next few days playing the role of the clueless husband. I cooked dinners, laughed at her stories, asked her about her day. I acted as if everything was normal, even as each conversation felt like rubbing salt in a wound. It was surreal, pretending like I hadn't seen the truth in black and white, pretending like I didn't know she was sneaking off to meet him, lying to me with every word that left her lips. The hardest part was going through the motions of our life together. We had routines, small rituals that we'd established over the years, and she continued them as if nothing had changed. I wondered if she even felt a flicker of guilt. Each time she reached for my hand, each time she kissed me goodnight, I wondered if she was thinking about him. But I held my tongue. My revenge would be better if she thought I was still blissfully unaware. I started preparing quietly. The first thing I did was to copy every message, every photo, every call log I could find. I backed up her entire phone history onto a spare hard drive, ensuring I had every detail. I spent hours combing through it all, piecing together their little rendezvous, their private jokes, their plans. Each text felt like a slap to the face, but I didn't stop. I wanted every bit of evidence. When the time came, I wanted her to see exactly how much I knew, to feel cornered, trapped by her own lies. After that, I made a few calls. I'd kept up with a lawyer friend from college, Jason, funny enough, the same name as her affair partner. I told him I needed advice, didn't give too many details, just asked what I'd need if I were preparing for a divorce. He gave me a rundown of the financial documents I'd need, what kind of evidence would help, and the typical timeline. I made sure to ask about the house, too, our biggest asset. By the end of the call, I had a rough outline of what I'd need to start this process without her knowing. But the divorce itself was just part of the plan. I didn't want her to simply walk away after what she'd done. She needed to understand exactly what her actions had cost. I thought about telling her family, her friends, making sure everyone knew who she really was. I thought about sending those texts to Jason's wife or girlfriend, if he had one. I wanted to make her betrayal something she'd never forget, something she'd never live down. One night, when she left her phone on the kitchen counter, I couldn't help myself. I scrolled through her photos, past the usual snapshots of us, our friends, and vacations. There, buried in a folder labeled Work Events, were photos of her with him. Smiling, her arm around his shoulders, looking happier than she'd looked with me in a long time. Each photo was a knife in my chest, but I saved every single one. I wanted proof of exactly who she'd chosen to destroy our marriage for. As I sifted through her photos, I came across something unexpected, a photo of her sitting at a table in a dimly lit restaurant, a glass of wine in her hand. But it wasn't the photo itself that caught my attention, it was what was on the table next to her hand. A small jewelry box. It wasn't a ring, but it was close enough, a thin gold bracelet with a heart-shaped charm. She was smiling down at it, and her face held an expression I hadn't seen in years. A fondness, a softness. She hadn't looked at me like that in ages. I clenched my teeth, feeling the burn of jealousy and anger twist in my gut. She'd taken this man to the places we'd shared, probably whispered the same promises to him that she once made to me. That was when I decided on the final piece of my plan. We had our anniversary coming up. 8 years, but it felt like a lifetime now. I'd been planning to take her to the same little bistro where we'd gone on our first date, a place she used to say made her feel like we were the only two people in the world. I realized that this anniversary dinner would be the perfect setting for what I had in mind. She wouldn't see it coming, not at all. In the days leading up to our anniversary, I kept up the charade. We ate dinner together, went for walks, even watched a few of our favorite movies. She seemed happy, and that's what made it all the more infuriating. She had no idea I knew, no idea that her lies were unspooling right in front of her. I wanted her to feel every bit of pain she'd put me through, and I was patient enough to wait until the moment was perfect. On the day of our anniversary, I told her we'd go out for a nice dinner, just the two of us. I could tell she was excited, thinking it was some romantic gesture. She even spent an hour getting ready, coming downstairs in a red dress that used to be my favorite. I couldn't deny that she looked beautiful, but the sight of her only hardened my resolve. She was putting on a show, and she'd get one in return. The restaurant was just as I remembered it, small and intimate, with dim lighting and a warm, cozy atmosphere. We sat down, and she was all smiles, ordering a bottle of our favorite wine and toasting to another amazing year together. I played along, lifting my glass and forcing a smile. Inside, my mind was racing, preparing for the moment I'd finally reveal everything I knew. We made small talk, reminiscing about the early days of our relationship, the places we'd traveled to, the little memories that had once made us laugh. I almost felt a pang of nostalgia, but it quickly faded. She was smiling across the table, looking every bit the devoted wife. I wondered if she even realized how much of a lie it all was. When the main course arrived, I decided it was time. I set my fork down, looked her in the eyes, and smiled, a genuine smile this time, because I knew exactly what I was about to do. "Amanda," I began, keeping my voice steady, calm. "I have a surprise for you." She looked curious, tilting her head slightly. "A surprise?" "You know I love surprises," she said, laughing softly. "Oh, I know you do," I replied, reaching into my jacket pocket and pulling out a small, neatly folded envelope. "I thought we could look back on all the great memories we've made." Her eyes lit up as she took the envelope, clearly expecting a card or maybe a few photos. But as she unfolded the pages and scanned the first few lines, her smile faltered. Her brow furrowed, and she looked up at me, her eyes filled with confusion. What is this?" she stammered, flipping through the pages, her face growing paler with each one. "Those are all the times you lied to me, Amanda," I said, my voice cold. "All the times you said you were working late, going out with friends. All the times you were with him." She stared at the pages, speechless, her face a mix of shock and panic. I watched as she tried to gather her thoughts, to find some excuse, some explanation. But there was no escaping this. She was trapped, caught by her own betrayal. "You think I didn't know?" I continued, my voice low. "I've known for weeks. I've seen every text, every photo. I know exactly what you've been doing, Amanda." She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her face crumpled, and I felt a strange sense of satisfaction watching her struggle, watching her realize that her lies had finally caught up with her. "This is just the beginning," I said, leaning back in my chair. "You wanted freedom, didn't you? Well, now you have it. Congratulations. Our marriage is over." I stood up, ignoring the stares from the other tables, and walked out, leaving her sitting there, alone, with the weight of her betrayal crushing her. Leaving her at that table felt like victory, but it was only the beginning. As I walked away, I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and emptiness. The restaurant doors swung shut behind me, and the cool night air hit my face, grounding me in the moment. I'd done it, I'd finally told her everything I knew, laid it all out in the open. There was no going back. But even with the revenge executed, the emotions didn't vanish. The anger still pulsed under the surface, mixed now with a hollow ache that I hadn't anticipated. I drove home in silence, letting the anger simmer down as I thought through my next steps. This was about more than just exposing her, it was about ensuring she felt the consequences, felt the full weight of her actions. By the time I reached home, I knew what I needed to do. I went straight to my laptop, pulled up the file I'd created with every piece of evidence I had, texts, photos, and copies of receipts showing her time with Jason. I'd thought about deleting it once I'd confronted her, but now I realized it served another purpose. The next day, I woke up early, feeling strangely light. I took a moment to soak in the quiet of the house, enjoying the silence before I went about my day. Amanda hadn't come home after the restaurant. I didn't know where she was, and honestly, I didn't care. She could stay with Jason, her perfect escape from our marriage. I could almost picture her texting him in a panic, hoping he'd have some plan to save her. Little did she know, that fantasy world she'd built around him was about to shatter too. Later that morning, I reached out to her parents. They'd always treated me like family, and it felt only right to let them know what was happening. It was a difficult conversation, made worse by the way they reacted, not with anger, but with disappointment. I could hear her mother's voice tremble as I explained what I'd found, how I'd tried to confront Amanda but had been met with lies and deceit. Her father was quiet, listening, and when I finished, he simply said, "Thank you for telling us. We'll take care of this on our end." I could only imagine the conversation that awaited her. She'd have to answer to them too, face the shame in front of the people who had always stood by her. With her family informed, I decided to handle the legal side. I reached out to my lawyer friend, Jason, to go over the next steps. Divorce was already on my mind, but there were financial matters to consider. I wanted a clean break, but I also didn't want to leave her with anything she didn't deserve. We discussed the division of assets, the house, and everything we'd built together. I felt a grim satisfaction knowing that our shared life would soon be dismantled, and she'd have to fight to keep any part of it. As the paperwork started moving, Amanda showed up at the house. She looked tired, as if she hadn't slept, her makeup smudged, eyes red. I didn't feel a shred of sympathy. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I held the door open, but didn't invite her to sit. She stood there, fidgeting, and I could tell she was struggling to find the right words. "You've made your choice, Amanda," I said coldly, crossing my arms. "I'm just making it official." She looked down, her face twisting with a mix of shame and desperation. I'm sorry. I don't even know what to say. I made a mistake. You think a mistake explains it? I cut in. You don't get to rewrite this as some minor lapse in judgment. You knew what you were doing every single time you lied to me. You just never thought you'd get caught. Her expression shifted, as if she were realizing the full impact of her actions for the first time. I don't know why I did it. I thought I was missing something in our marriage, and Jason, he made me feel alive again. You mean he made you feel like you could throw away everything we had? I said, my voice icy. You wanted something exciting? Well, congratulations. You've got it. She swallowed, trying to hold back tears. I know I messed up, but please, can we at least talk about this? I don't want to lose everything. You already have, I replied simply. This isn't just about us anymore. You betrayed me, Amanda. You threw away years of trust. There's no coming back from that. For a moment, she looked like she might argue, but the reality seemed to sink in. She nodded, defeated, and left without another word. Over the next few weeks, things moved quickly. The legal documents came through, and I went through each page carefully, ensuring every detail was exactly as I wanted. I hadn't thought about what it would feel like to see my life reduced to a series of financial statements and property agreements, but in a way, it felt fitting. Our marriage had been devalued long before I filed those papers. Amanda called a few times, leaving voicemails asking for a chance to talk, to work things out, but I never responded. She'd made her bed. Jason, her so-called escape, had also apparently cut ties with her after realizing the mess she was in. I wondered if he'd thought it was all just a fling, an affair without consequences. Reality had hit them both harder than they'd expected. Her friends and colleagues started to catch wind of what had happened, and slowly, the facade Amanda had built around herself began to crumble. She was no longer the perfect wife or the loyal friend. She was the woman who'd betrayed her husband, left him for a fleeting thrill that had fizzled out almost as quickly as it began. One afternoon, I ran into one of our mutual friends at the grocery store. She looked at me with a mix of pity and admiration, clearly torn over what had happened. Mark, I'm so sorry about everything, she said, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder. I had no idea she was capable of something like this. I shrugged, forcing a small smile. Neither did I. She's been trying to get people to see her side, but no one's really buying it. I think she's finally realizing what she's done. For a moment, I felt a pang of sympathy for Amanda. She'd thrown everything away, and now she was reaping the consequences. But I pushed the feeling aside. This was her bed, and she'd lie in it alone. The house felt quieter without her, a strange emptiness that I was still adjusting to. There were nights when I found myself staring at the empty spot on the couch where she used to sit, trying to piece together the fragments of my life without her in it. It was difficult, but each day, it hurt a little less. I was finally free from the lie, the betrayal, and the endless cycle of distrust. On the day the divorce was finalized, I took myself out to the same restaurant where we'd had that fateful anniversary dinner. I sat alone, ordered a glass of wine, and toasted to the life I was rebuilding. It wasn't the future I'd planned, but it was mine. And it was real. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain: I would never allow myself to be anyone's second choice again. As I settled into my new life, the silence that once felt hollow began to feel like freedom. I'd rearranged the house, cleaned out her things, and even painted the walls a different color. It was therapeutic, marking the end of one life and the beginning of another. I filled my days with work, with friends, with rediscovering the parts of myself that had been smothered under years of compromise. Slowly, I began to feel whole again. Months passed, and life settled into a comfortable rhythm. But then, one evening, a letter arrived in the mail, a plain envelope with my name printed in Amanda's handwriting. I hesitated, my stomach churning as I considered tossing it away. But curiosity won, and I carefully opened the envelope, bracing myself for whatever she had to say. Inside was a single sheet of paper, her writing shaky and uneven. Mark. I know I have no right to ask you for anything after what I've done. I'm ashamed of what I became and how I treated you. But you were right. Jason was a fantasy I got lost in, one that never even made sense outside of my own selfish mind. He left me, of course, once he realized he'd gotten everything he wanted from me. I was a fool to ever think he cared for me the way you did. You're the one I should have fought for, the one who was always there for me when I needed you most. I know I can't undo what I've done, but I've been going to therapy, trying to understand why I destroyed the only real thing I had in my life. I miss you, Mark. Every day I realize how much I've lost. I know this might mean nothing to you now, and it probably shouldn't. But I needed to say it. I'm so sorry. I finished reading the letter, and a strange calm settled over me. I felt no anger, no sadness. Just a gentle finality, like the last chapter of a book you close and put away. I folded the letter back into the envelope, tucked it into a drawer, and moved on with my night, feeling no urge to respond. Her words were empty to me now. She was no longer part of my life. But then, just a week later, something happened that shook me out of my quiet, settled world. It was a Saturday morning, and I was heading out for a run when I saw a woman standing in my driveway. She looked familiar, though I couldn't place her at first, blonde, tall, with striking blue eyes that glinted in the morning light. Mark, she called, taking a cautious step forward. It's me, Claire. Claire. The name triggered a memory, and I suddenly placed her as one of Amanda's old friends. She had lived out of town, and I'd only met her once or twice at gatherings. Amanda had always talked about her as the wild one of the group, the one who moved to the city and lived a life that seemed exotic compared to our suburban routine. Claire, I replied, walking over to her, curious. What brings you here? She gave a small, hesitant smile. I wanted to talk to you about Amanda. I tried to reach you a few times, but I guess my messages never got through. I wanted to check on you. Check on me? I echoed, puzzled. I didn't know you were even in town. I've been back for a while, she said, shifting her weight uncomfortably. Look, Mark, I'm here because I think there are things you should know about Amanda. Things that she might not have told you. A flash of suspicion prickled at me. I'd already gone through hell with Amanda's betrayal, and I didn't know if I could take more. Claire, I'm not sure I want to dig up old wounds, I said cautiously. She shook her head. This isn't about the affair. I think Amanda had deeper issues. Ones that none of us really saw. She used people, Mark. She hurt a lot of people, but she had a way of hiding it behind her charm. What are you trying to say? Claire took a deep breath. Amanda and Jason, they weren't just an affair. I think they were scheming, using you. She used people for her own gain, Mark. And not just you. My stomach twisted. Scheming? What are you talking about? She and Jason? I think they planned it all, Mark. She was setting you up to take a fall, to leave with everything once you'd confronted her. She was trying to make you look like the villain. Claire's voice was a mix of anger and disbelief. I only pieced it together recently, but they were plotting from the start. It felt like the ground beneath me had shifted, leaving me dizzy and off balance. My mind raced back through the years, to moments I dismissed as minor misunderstandings or times when Amanda had urged me to make certain investments, to take certain steps in my career. Had I been nothing but a pawn in her game? So what are you saying? I managed, my voice trembling. That she, manipulated me into marrying her? Into giving her everything? Claire nodded slowly. I know it sounds insane. But after what I've learned, I'm sure of it. I don't think you ever really knew her, Mark. None of us did. I felt a chill settle over me, colder than anything I'd felt since discovering her betrayal. If what Claire was saying was true, Amanda had used me in ways I hadn't even considered. She'd plotted, connived, and destroyed everything we had for her own selfish gain. She'd manipulated everyone, weaving a web of deceit so tangled I couldn't begin to unravel it. I looked back at Claire, taking in her expression of quiet concern. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I know what she's put you through," Claire replied, her eyes softening. "I wanted you to know the truth, even if it's too late to do anything about it. You deserve to know who you were really married to." We stood there in silence, the weight of her words settling between us. I felt a strange sense of relief, mingled with the same anger and betrayal I'd felt that night in the restaurant. Amanda's betrayal had gone deeper than I'd ever realized, but knowing the truth, twisted as it was, allowed me to close the door on that chapter of my life once and for all. Claire and I exchanged a few more words, and then she left. I watched her car pull away, feeling a strange calm settle over me. Amanda had tried to destroy me, but in the end, it was her own web of lies that had unraveled, leaving her alone in the ruins she'd created. That night, as I sat in my empty home, I found myself feeling something unexpected: gratitude. I'd been freed from Amanda's trap, free to start again, free to rebuild a life based on truth. And as I looked out into the night, I felt a quiet resolve settle within me. Amanda may have stolen years from me, but she hadn't taken everything. In the end, I'd survived. And I'd learned that real strength comes not from revenge, but from the courage to move on.